Today's story explores three devastating cases of love, jealousy, and betrayal that turned fatal. First, the infamous murder of Travis Alexander by his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias, a shocking act of obsession that captivated the nation during a sensational trial. Then the heartbreaking story of Lauren McCluskey, a college athlete whose cries for help went unheard, leading to her tragic murder by an ex-boyfriend. Finally, the case of Michelle Lay, a promising nursing student whose life was stolen by someone consumed with jealousy and rage. But before we begin, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right place. We upload daily, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's get into today's story. On the evening of June 9, 2008, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Mesa, Arizona, was unprepared for the tragedy about to unfold. Travis Alexander, a charismatic speaker and well-loved salesman, hadn't been heard from in several days. For his friends, this was highly unusual. Travis was known for his vibrant personality and consistent communication. Concerned, a group of them decided to check on him at his home. As they approached the house, an unsettling stillness greeted them. The windows were dark, and despite multiple knocks, there was no response. Nervous, but determined, they decided to enter the home. Inside, an eerie quiet replaced the usual warmth of Travis's space. They called his name, their voices echoing through the still air, but there was only silence. Something was wrong. A faint, unsettling odor lingered in the air, growing stronger as they moved toward his bedroom. Their apprehension deepened as they opened the door and stepped into the master suite. There, in the bathroom, they discovered Travis. He was no longer alive. The scene was devastating. Friends immediately contacted authorities, who arrived shortly after and secured the area. The investigators began piecing together the story of what had occurred. Early observations suggested this wasn't an accident or random event. There were clear signs of a struggle. This had been a targeted act. Evidence at the scene began to paint a clearer picture. Investigators found several clues, including a camera in the washing machine. The device seemed damaged, but the memory card was intact, holding critical images. These photos would later become a pivotal element in the investigation. As detectives reviewed Travis' life and relationships, one name stood out: Jodi Arias. Jodi had been a prominent figure in Travis's life, a former partner whose connection to him was both intense and tumultuous. To the outside world, Jodi was soft-spoken and friendly. However, friends of Travis had witnessed moments of possessiveness and obsession, leaving them deeply uneasy about her. Jodi initially cooperated when questioned, expressing sadness over Travis's passing and claiming she hadn't been near his home during the time frame in question. But inconsistencies in her story quickly emerged. Detectives had evidence placing her near the scene. A series of photos taken on the memory card showed her with Travis on the day investigators believed the incident had occurred. The most chilling discovery was the final series of photos. They depicted moments from that day, some showing Jodi and Travis together. Others appeared accidental, but captured key details of the timeline investigators were building. Confronted with this, Jodi's story shifted multiple times. Each new version raised more questions than answers. Investigators also uncovered other signs of planning. Receipts showed she had taken deliberate steps to travel unnoticed, and additional items linked her to the events of that day. These findings pointed to a calculated and intentional act, far removed from the initial narrative she had presented. As evidence mounted, the case became more complex, revealing a troubling relationship dynamic filled with control, jealousy, and unresolved conflict. The investigation would continue to peel back the layers of a deeply emotional and tragic story. What had happened to Travis was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of months of tension and decisions made in the heat of emotion. For now, investigators had the beginnings of a case, but the questions remained. What had driven these actions? And how had a connection that once seemed filled with love spiraled into such a devastating outcome? The search for answers had only just begun. The investigation into Travis Alexander's untimely death continued to gather momentum, and the focus sharpened on Jodi Arias. While her initial demeanor was cooperative and calm, the evidence told a different story. Investigators began piecing together a timeline that contradicted her version of events, unraveling her carefully constructed alibi. Detectives examined the contents of the memory card retrieved from the damaged camera. The photos were more revealing than anyone could have anticipated. They showed Travis and Jodi spending time together on the very day the incident occurred. The images began innocently enough, documenting private moments between the two. However, as investigators scrolled through the sequence, the tone of the images changed. One photo, time-stamped just moments before the estimated time of the incident, captured Travis in the shower, unaware of what was about to happen. The following images were blurry, seemingly taken in haste or accidentally. Among them, investigators found an out-of-focus shot of the bathroom floor. What made it chilling was the unmistakable sight of blood in the frame. These photos weren't just snapshots, they were breadcrumbs leading directly to the truth. While the forensic team analyzed the camera, detectives turned their attention to Jodi's whereabouts leading up to June 9. She had claimed to be far from Arizona, visiting friends in California. But phone records and receipts told a different story. Gas station receipts revealed a calculated effort to avoid creating a digital trail. She had purchased gas cans to fill her vehicle, minimizing the need to stop at stations where her presence could be tracked. Additionally, she dyed her hair a darker color, a subtle but deliberate move to change her appearance. When confronted with this evidence, Jodi's story began to shift. At first, she maintained her innocence, insisting she had no idea what had happened to Travis. But as the evidence piled up, her narrative changed. She told investigators a harrowing story of two masked intruders breaking into the house and attacking both her and Travis. She claimed to have narrowly escaped with her life, but hadn't reported the incident out of fear. Her story, though dramatic, failed to align with the physical evidence. There were no signs of forced entry, and the timeline contradicted her claims. Investigators pressed further, and Jodi's inconsistencies only deepened their suspicions. It became clear that the relationship between Jodi and Travis had been far more volatile than she had let on. Friends of Travis came forward, sharing accounts of Jodi's behavior during and after their relationship. She had shown up uninvited to his home on multiple occasions, slashed his tires, and sent unsettling messages when she felt ignored. Despite their breakup, Jodi had remained a persistent presence in Travis's life, oscillating between affection and anger. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered a series of text messages and emails between the two. These exchanges painted a picture of a tumultuous relationship marked by passion, jealousy, and conflict. Travis, at times, expressed frustration with Jodi's behavior, calling it unpredictable and invasive. Yet, there were also moments of tenderness, evidence of a connection that, despite its toxicity, had once been meaningful. Jodi's behavior in the days following Travis's death further raised eyebrows. She had called his voicemail multiple times, left messages expressing concern for his well-being, and even posted a tribute to him online. These actions, which might have seemed innocent to an outsider, struck investigators as calculated, an attempt to create a narrative of concern and distance herself from the crime. As the evidence mounted, Jodi's arrest became inevitable. On July 15, 2008, she was taken into custody. Even then, she maintained her composure, smiling for her mugshot, as though unaware of the gravity of the situation. Her arrest marked a turning point in the case, but it was only the beginning of a long journey toward uncovering the full truth of what had happened to Travis Alexander. As Jodi Arias sat in custody, the weight of the evidence against her began to surface in full force. Investigators had carefully pieced together the narrative, and now they needed answers. Jodi, however, remained a puzzle. Her demeanor calm, her words deliberate, as if she were attempting to outmaneuver the truth. What followed was a psychological chess game that would expose the dark undercurrents of her relationship with Travis Alexander. The interrogation room became the stage for Jodi's shifting accounts. Detectives presented her with the damning photos from the recovered memory card. At first, she tried to dismiss their significance, but when pressed, her story morphed once again. She finally admitted to being present in Travis's home on the day of the incident, but claimed that she had acted in self-defense. Her new version of events was as startling as it was implausible. She described an altercation that escalated rapidly, portraying Travis as the aggressor and herself as a victim forced to protect her own life. According to Jodi, Travis had become enraged, and she acted in desperation. However, this narrative was riddled with inconsistencies. Investigators pointed out that her injuries were minimal, while Travis's wounds told a different story, one of prolonged struggle and overwhelming force. The timeline was critical. The evidence showed premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of defense. The gas cans, her altered appearance, and her movements in the days leading up to the incident painted a chilling picture. Died. Surveillance footage and receipts contradicted her claims of innocence. Meanwhile, autopsy findings revealed that Travis had endured multiple injuries, further undermining her version of events. Prosecutors began building their case, and it quickly became clear that this was no ordinary trial. The relationship between Jodi and Travis, filled with passion and turbulence, became a focal point. Friends and acquaintances testified to the intensity of their connection, describing Jodi's behavior as increasingly erratic in the months leading up to Travis's death. Witnesses recounted instances of Jodi appearing uninvited at Travis's home, hacking into his social media accounts, and leaving unsettling voicemails. One particularly chilling detail was the discovery of a series of messages sent by Jodi, expressing both deep affection and seething anger toward Travis. These communications showcased her obsession and inability to let go of their fractured relationship. The prosecution argued that Jodi's actions were not those of a victim, but of someone consumed by jealousy and control. They presented the evidence as a carefully orchestrated plan, executed in response to Travis's attempts to distance himself. The text messages between the two revealed a relationship that had spiraled into toxicity, with Travis expressing frustration over Jodi's relentless pursuit and her refusal to accept their breakup. Meanwhile, Jodi's defense team worked to paint a different picture. They portrayed her as a woman trapped in an emotionally volatile relationship, emphasizing moments of conflict and alleged mistreatment. They claimed that her actions were a result of fear and trauma, a desperate response to a dangerous situation. This argument introduced a new layer of complexity, forcing jurors to grapple with contrasting narratives. As the investigation deepened, so did public interest. The case became a media sensation, with every development scrutinized and debated. Jodi's demeanor during court appearances added to the intrigue. She alternated between displays of vulnerability and unsettling confidence, leaving observers questioning her sincerity. The trial preparations revealed just how much hinged on the forensic evidence. Expert witnesses dissected the photos, the physical evidence, and the crime scene. Each detail was analyzed to build a cohesive narrative of what had transpired in the hours leading up to Travis's death. These efforts uncovered a harrowing story of manipulation, calculated decisions, and a relationship that had unraveled with devastating consequences. Jodi's arrest and subsequent statements marked a turning point in the case. What began as a search for answers had now become a quest for accountability. With the courtroom looming, the stage was set for a trial that would delve into the depths of obsession, betrayal, and tragedy. Every revelation, every piece of evidence brought them closer to the truth, a truth that was as dark as it was undeniable. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial of Jodi Arias began. It wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a spectacle. The case had captured national attention, and every detail of the proceedings was dissected by the media and the public. From the start, it was clear that this trial would be unlike any other, a battle between two starkly different portrayals of what had happened on that fateful day. The prosecution opened with a narrative of premeditation, painting Jodi as a meticulous planner who had carefully orchestrated her actions. They began by presenting the evidence, the receipts for gas cans, her attempts to alter her appearance, and most chillingly, the photos from the memory card. These photos weren't just evidence, they were a timeline of events, a haunting account of the hours leading up to Travis Alexander's death. One of the most compelling pieces of testimony came from the forensic experts. They analyzed the physical evidence, including the injuries sustained by Travis. The autopsy revealed that he had been injured multiple times, each injury indicative of an intense struggle. The forensic pathologist described the wounds in clinical detail, emphasizing the sustained and deliberate nature of the attack. The prosecution argued that this was not a spontaneous act, but a calculated and violent act of retaliation. The prosecution also introduced messages and emails exchanged between Jodi and Travis in the weeks leading up to his death. These messages showed a relationship fraught with tension, jealousy, and unresolved conflict. In one particularly revealing exchange, Travis expressed frustration with Jodi's behavior, accusing her of invading his privacy and refusing to move on. The messages provided a glimpse into the deteriorating dynamic between them, supporting the prosecution's narrative of obsession and premeditation. When it was the defense's turn, they framed Jodi as a woman pushed to her breaking point, trapped in a relationship that had turned emotionally and psychologically damaging. They presented their own set of messages and communications, emphasizing moments of tension and conflict. They argued that Travis had exhibited controlling behavior and that Jodi's actions were a desperate response to fear. The defense's strategy was clear: to shift the focus from the premeditated nature of the act to the circumstances that led up to it. Jodi herself took the stand, a decision that would prove both compelling and polarizing. Her testimony spanned days, during which she described her version of events in painstaking detail. She recounted their relationship from its early passionate beginnings to its eventual unraveling. Her words were vivid, often emotional, as she portrayed herself as a victim who had acted out of self-preservation. The courtroom hung on her every word, but her demeanor raised questions. At times, she appeared composed and articulate, even as she described the most harrowing details. At other moments, her emotional responses felt rehearsed, calculated to elicit sympathy. Observers noted the inconsistencies in her narrative, particularly when juxtaposed with the evidence presented by the prosecution. The cross-examination was relentless. The prosecutor dismantled her testimony piece by piece, highlighting contradictions and pressing her on details she struggled to explain. He pointed out the discrepancies between her initial statements to investigators and her testimony in court, emphasizing the evolving nature of her story. The prosecutor's sharp questioning left little room for doubt about the calculated elements of her actions. Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding the trial intensified. News outlets covered every moment, from the testimony to the jury's reaction. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Jodi as a manipulative figure who had orchestrated a horrific act, while others viewed her as a woman caught in a volatile situation. The trial became a cultural phenomenon, with true crime enthusiasts analyzing every detail and social media amplifying the debates. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case was as much about the relationship between Jodi and Travis as it was about the events of June 9. The courtroom became a stage for the unraveling of a complex and toxic connection, one that had spiraled into tragedy. Every witness, every piece of evidence added another layer to the narrative, leaving the jury with the monumental task of determining the truth. The stakes could not have been higher, and the weight of the decision loomed over everyone in that courtroom. As the trial drew closer to its conclusion, the tension in the courtroom reached a breaking point. Both the prosecution and defense made their final arguments, painting starkly different pictures of what had happened in the final moments of Travis Alexander's life. For the jurors, the decision ahead was nothing short of monumental. The prosecution's closing argument was meticulous and forceful. They walked the jury through the timeline of events, emphasizing the premeditated nature of Jodi Arias' actions. Every detail was laid bare: the gas cans purchased to avoid leaving a trail, the camera photos capturing the day's progression, and the brutal injuries Travis sustained. They argued that these elements could not be dismissed as the actions of someone acting in self-defense. Instead, they pointed to a calculated plan driven by anger and obsession. The prosecutor appealed to the jury's sense of justice, reminding them of Travis's humanity. They spoke about his aspirations, his relationships, and the life that had been tragically cut short. With every word, they reinforced the narrative that this was a deliberate act, one designed to ensure Travis could never move forward without Jodi. The defense, however, urged the jury to see the story differently. Their closing argument focused on Jodi's state of mind, portraying her as a woman who had been pushed to the edge by a complex and volatile relationship. They acknowledged the evidence, but framed her actions as those of someone caught in an emotional and psychological storm. The defense asked the jury to consider the possibility of fear, trauma, and impulsive decisions in the heat of the moment. Jodi's time on the stand had left an indelible impression. To some, her testimony had been a calculated performance. To others, it was a raw and vulnerable account of a deeply troubled relationship. The jury now had to weigh her words against the overwhelming physical evidence and decide what they believed. As the case was handed over to the jury, the waiting began. For days, the nation held its breath as the jurors deliberated. Speculation ran rampant. What would they decide? The courtroom, once filled with the voices of witnesses and attorneys, now sat silent, the weight of the case hanging in the air. When the jury finally returned, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The verdict was read aloud: guilty of first-degree murder. The decision sent shockwaves through the courtroom and beyond. For Travis's family, it was a moment of bittersweet relief, a step toward justice for their son and brother, though nothing could truly ease their loss. The sentencing phase brought its own challenges. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, arguing that the severity and premeditation of the crime warranted the ultimate punishment. The defense countered, urging the jury to consider life imprisonment as an alternative, emphasizing Jodi's lack of prior criminal history and her potential for rehabilitation. The jury, however, was unable to reach a unanimous decision on the sentence, resulting in a deadlock. This led to a retrial of the penalty phase, which ultimately concluded with Jodi being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, this brought closure, while others remained divided on whether the punishment fit the crime. In the aftermath, Travis's family became vocal advocates for justice and healing. They spoke openly about the impact of the trial, their enduring grief, and their mission to honor Travis's memory. Meanwhile, the case became a cultural touchstone, dissected in true crime documentaries, podcasts, and discussions that sought to understand its complex dynamics. For Jodi Arias, life behind bars began with a mixture of infamy and isolation. Her story remained a subject of fascination and debate, with some viewing her as a cautionary tale of jealousy and obsession, while others questioned the broader implications of the case on gender, relationships, and the justice system. In the years that followed, the tragedy of Travis Alexander's death continued to resonate. His story became a symbol of the devastating consequences of toxic relationships, and the case served as a reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing red flags before they escalate. Though justice had been served, the emotional scars left behind would endure for all those touched by the case. The next story is called When Protection Fails. On a crisp October evening in 2018, Lauren McCluskey was walking back to her dorm at the University of Utah. The air was cool, and the golden light of street lamps stretched across the campus walkways. She had just finished a workout at the university gym, her mind focused on the usual concerns of a student-athlete juggling academics and training. But as she approached her dorm, she felt the faintest prickle of unease. Lauren had reason to be wary. Weeks earlier, she had ended a relationship with a man named Melvin Rowland. What started as a seemingly normal relationship had quickly unraveled when Lauren discovered shocking truths about him: his real age, his criminal past, and the lies he had told her. She had cut ties immediately, even going as far as to contact campus police to report him. Despite her warnings, Rowland had remained on the periphery of her life, making her feel unsafe even as she tried to move on. As she neared her dorm that night, her phone buzzed. It was one of her friends checking in, knowing Lauren had been on edge recently. She typed back a quick reply, reassuring them she was okay. She had taken precautions, walking in well-lit areas, staying in constant contact with her friends. But safety measures can only go so far when danger is determined to find you. She didn't notice the car parked nearby until it was too late. The door swung open, and a man stepped out, his figure partially obscured in the dim light. It was Rowland. He moved quickly toward her, calling her name in a tone that sounded almost friendly. But Lauren's instincts screamed at her to stay away. She hesitated, clutching her phone tightly, and her heart raced as she calculated her next move. "Lauren, I just want to talk," he said, his voice calm but insistent. She froze, torn between fleeing and trying to reason with him. Rowland closed the distance between them, his presence looming. He gestured toward his car, insisting he only needed a moment of her time to explain himself, to apologize. But Lauren wasn't naive. What? She had spent the last few weeks trying to escape the shadow he cast over her life. She shook her head, her voice firm as she told him to leave her alone. Yet, Rowland didn't stop. His demeanor shifted, his calm exterior cracking as frustration bled through. His words grew sharper, his gestures more forceful. Sensing the escalation, Lauren turned and began to walk away, her heart pounding. She dialed 911 on her phone, whispering to the operator about her situation. The operator's voice was steady, instructing her to stay on the line, to keep moving towards safety. But before she could get far, Roland grabbed her, pulling her toward the car. Her phone clattered to the ground, the call still connected. The operator's voice echoed faintly in the dark as Roland forced Lauren into the vehicle. Witnesses nearby would later report hearing faint cries, but in the moment it happened so quickly that no one was able to intervene. The car sped off into the night, leaving behind only scattered clues of what had occurred. Inside the car, Lauren tried to stay calm. She spoke softly, appealing to Roland's sense of reason. She told him she didn't want any trouble, that they could resolve this without further conflict. But Roland's behavior was erratic. He alternated between anger and pleading, his grip on reality slipping with every passing moment. Lauren's mind raced as she searched for a way out. Back on campus, the dropped phone became a lifeline. The 911 operator alerted local authorities, who immediately began tracing the call and dispatching officers. Friends and family were contacted, their growing dread mirrored by the urgency of law enforcement. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. In the car, Lauren's attempts to de-escalate the situation began to falter. Roland's mood darkened, his words growing harsher, his actions more unpredictable. The hope of reasoning with him faded, replaced by the cold realization that she was in grave danger. She scanned the passing streets, looking for an opportunity to escape, but Roland seemed to anticipate her every move. As the car disappeared into the city's maze of streets, the search for Lauren began in earnest. Police mobilized, combing through surveillance footage and questioning anyone who might have seen the car. Lauren's friends pleaded for information on social media, their desperation spreading like wildfire through the community. But time was slipping away, and Lauren's fate was becoming more uncertain by the minute. Somewhere in the dark, far from the safety of her campus, a young woman's fight for survival was unfolding, silent, terrifying, and unseen. As the car sped through the city streets, Lauren McCluskey sat tense and alert, every nerve on edge. The darkness outside the window mirrored the sinking fear in her chest. She glanced toward the passenger side door, calculating whether she could make a run for it if the car slowed at a red light or stop sign. But Roland, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, was watching her too closely. The faint glow from the dashboard lit his face, and his expression shifted between agitation and icy calm. Roland's voice broke the silence. "Why couldn't you just listen to me, Lauren?" he asked, his tone carrying a hint of betrayal. "I told you I cared about you. I wanted to make things right." His words, though soft, were laced with an undercurrent of something darker, something that made Lauren's pulse quicken even more. She steadied her voice, trying to keep him calm. "I know, Melvin. I know, but this isn't the way to fix anything. Let's just stop and talk, okay?" she said, hoping her words might diffuse the situation. She kept her hands in her lap, clutching her phone as if it might still save her. Unbeknownst to Roland, the phone had sent a location ping when she dropped her emergency call earlier. Somewhere out there, help was on its way. She just had to hold on. Roland glanced at her, his gaze hardening. "You think I'm stupid, don't you? You think I don't know what you've been doing? Talking to the police, telling them lies about me?" His voice grew louder, his anger bubbling to the surface. Lauren shook her head quickly, denying it, trying to placate him. "No, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just needed space. I was scared, that's all," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He scoffed, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "Scared of me? You shouldn't be scared of me. I loved you, Lauren. I still do," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The car turned sharply onto a quieter road, and Lauren realized they were moving farther away from the city. The buildings gave way to empty lots and industrial zones, the streetlights growing sparser with every mile. In the distance, flashing red and blue lights appeared, police cars combing the area, responding to the 911 alert. Lauren's heart leaped with hope, but Roland spotted them too. His jaw clenched, and his foot pressed harder on the gas. The car surged forward, weaving through side streets in an effort to lose any possible pursuers. Meanwhile, back at the University of Utah, Lauren's friends were working desperately to help authorities piece together what had happened. They shared details about her recent concerns with Roland and his history, painting a clearer picture of the man police were now hunting. Each revelation added urgency to the search. Inside the car, Lauren kept her voice steady, trying to buy time. "We can figure this out together, Melvin," she said. "Just let me go, and we can fix everything. You don't want to do something you'll regret." Her words hung in the air, but Roland didn't respond. His silence was more terrifying than his outburst. It was the quiet of a man whose mind was racing toward a decision. Finally, the car slowed as Roland pulled into an abandoned parking lot, surrounded by looming shadows and silence. He turned off the engine, plunging them into stillness. Lauren's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she realized this might be her only chance to escape. She reached for the door handle, but Roland's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Don't," he said sharply, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, in one fluid motion, he reached into the back seat, retrieving something she couldn't quite see in the dim light. The tension in the car was suffocating, every second stretching into eternity. Lauren's mind raced. She thought of her family, her friends, the life she had worked so hard to build. She couldn't let it end here. Summoning every ounce of courage, she made one last attempt to reason with him. "Melvin, please, you don't have to do this. You can walk away right now, and we'll figure everything out. It's not too late." But Roland's expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed by the faint light of the dashboard. Outside, the night was silent, the world unaware of the life-or-death struggle unfolding in that isolated lot. The abandoned parking lot loomed ominously in the stillness of the night. The only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of traffic, far removed from where Lauren McCluskey now sat frozen, her mind racing for a way out. Roland's grip on her wrist remained firm, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Fear and determination battled within her as she carefully considered her next words. "Melvin," she said softly, forcing calm into her trembling voice, "you can leave all of this behind. Whatever's happened, we can find a way to fix it." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her ground, locking her eyes on him. He didn't respond immediately, his jaw tightening as he stared out into the darkness. For a moment, it seemed like her words might be getting through. Roland loosened his grip slightly, and his posture slumped, as if the weight of his actions was beginning to settle on him. But then, his demeanor shifted again, his expression hardening as he seemed to double down on his resolve. "You don't get it, Lauren," he muttered. "There's no going back. Not for me." Her heart sank at his words, the finality in his tone chilling her to the core. She knew that waiting any longer would only make her chances of escape slimmer. Glancing quickly at the door handle, she readied herself for a sudden move, calculating how much time she'd have before he could react. Before she could act, the faint glow of headlights swept across the lot. The sound of an approaching car sent a jolt through both of them. Roland stiffened, his head snapping toward the incoming vehicle. It wasn't a police car, but the unexpected presence made him uneasy. Seizing the moment, Lauren yanked her arm free and threw herself at the door handle. The door swung open, and she stumbled out into the night air. She ran as fast as she could, adrenaline propelling her forward. Behind her, she heard Roland shouting, his footsteps pounding against the pavement as he gave chase. Her lungs burned, but she didn't dare slow down, darting toward the shadows in the hopes of finding cover or someone to help. Roland's pace quickened, his voice growing louder as he closed the distance. "Lauren, stop! You're making this worse!" he shouted, his tone teetering between anger and desperation. She didn't stop, her focus solely on staying out of his reach. The vast emptiness of the lot offered little in the way of hiding places, and she knew she couldn't outrun him forever. As her mind raced for options, her foot caught on a crack in the pavement, and she stumbled, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through her palms and knees, but she scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sting. Roland was only a few steps behind now, his presence looming as he reached for her. In her desperation, Lauren let out a piercing scream, her voice echoing into the night. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a reply, a faint voice or the sound of movement. Hope flickered within her, and she screamed again, louder this time. But Roland was undeterred, his focus locked on her as he closed the gap. Suddenly, bright lights flooded the lot, and the unmistakable sound of sirens shattered the tension. Police vehicles roared into view, their tires screeching as they came to a stop. Officers leapt from their cars, weapons drawn, their commands cutting through the chaos. "Stop! Hands in the air!" one of them shouted, their flashlight beams trained on Roland. Roland froze, his body rigid as he processed the scene around him. For a brief moment, it looked like he might comply, his hands twitching at his sides. But then, without warning, he bolted toward the far side of the lot, disappearing into the shadows. The officers gave chase, their shouts and the pounding of boots fading into the distance. Lauren collapsed to the ground, her body shaking from exhaustion and relief. The officers who remained quickly surrounded her, shielding her from any potential danger. One knelt beside her, speaking calmly and reassuringly as they assessed her condition. "You're safe now," the officer said, his voice steady. "We've got you." But even as the immediate danger subsided, the night was far from over. Roland was still on the run, and the search for him would become a race against time, a race to ensure he couldn't harm anyone else. The search for Melvin Roland escalated rapidly, transforming the quiet night into a scene of urgent activity. Patrol cars crisscrossed the city, their sirens piercing the air as officers coordinated a dragnet to close in on the suspect. Helicopters equipped with searchlights joined the effort, sweeping over rooftops and alleyways, their beams casting long, dramatic shadows against the urban landscape. Lauren McCluskey, now in the protective care of law enforcement, sat in the back of a patrol car. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she recounted the harrowing events to an investigator seated beside her. Despite the overwhelming exhaustion, she provided crucial details: where Roland had taken her, the make and model of his car, and the direction he had fled. Each word she spoke was another piece of the puzzle, a critical lead in the effort to apprehend her captor. Meanwhile, Roland moved through the city with a calculated urgency. He had abandoned his car and was now traveling on foot, using his knowledge of Salt Lake City's layout to evade capture. Roland had lived a life marked by manipulation and cunning, and he now relied on those same instincts to stay one step ahead of the officers closing in. Every shadow became a potential hiding place, every darkened alley a route to escape. But the net was tightening, and his options were running out. Back at the University of Utah, news of the incident began to spread. Students and faculty gathered in small groups, their faces lit by the glow of their phones as updates filtered through social media. The campus was placed on high alert, with security personnel patrolling every corner and entry point. The air was thick, with a mixture of fear and resolve, a collective determination to see justice done. As the hours wore on, police tracked Roland's movements using surveillance footage and witness reports. Cameras captured him moving through a busier section of the city, his pace quick but deliberate. He avoided the well-lit streets, instead sticking to side roads and back alleys. Despite his efforts, the coordinated response of law enforcement began to bear fruit. Around midnight, officers received a tip that a man matching Roland's description had been spotted entering a downtown apartment complex. The building was surrounded within minutes, and a tactical team prepared to make entry. The scene was tense, every movement deliberate as officers approached the door. Roland was believed to be behind. Inside, Roland sat on the floor of a small, sparsely furnished apartment. He had turned off the lights and pulled the curtains, leaving the room bathed in a dim glow from the streetlights outside. His breathing was shallow, his mind racing as he weighed his next move. He knew the end was near, but he wasn't ready to surrender. The sound of heavy footsteps and authoritative voices filled the hallway outside. "This is the Salt Lake City Police Department," an officer called out. "We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up and no one will get hurt." The command hung in the air, met only with silence from within. For several minutes, the officers repeated their instructions, giving Roland every opportunity to comply. But as the seconds ticked by, it became clear that he had no intention of doing so. The decision was made to breach the door, and with a loud crash, the tactical team entered. Inside, they found Roland in the far corner of the room, a defiant glare in his eyes. What followed was swift and precise, the officers ensuring the safety of everyone involved while taking Roland into custody. The apprehension marked the culmination of a night filled with terror, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. As Roland was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, the streets outside were filled with flashing lights and onlookers who had gathered to witness the dramatic conclusion. Lauren, now safe with her friends and family, received word that her nightmare was over. But even as relief washed over those who cared for her, the weight of what she had endured remained heavy. The events of the night left an indelible mark on the city and its residents. Questions began to emerge, not just about Roland's actions, but about the systems and circumstances that had allowed him to carry out his plan. Those questions would lead to a reckoning, one that sought to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. In the days that followed, the fallout from the harrowing events rippled through the community. Lauren McCluskey's story became a symbol of strength and the enduring need for systemic accountability. While her immediate nightmare had come to an end, the emotional and institutional reckoning had only just begun. For Lauren, the return to daily life was far from ordinary. Surrounded by her family and closest friends, she began the difficult process of healing. The trauma she had endured lingered in her every thought and interaction, but her resolve to reclaim her life was unwavering. She spoke openly with her loved ones about her experiences, channeling her pain into a quiet determination to move forward. The University of Utah, however, found itself at the center of a storm of public outrage. The details of the case exposed a series of systemic failures, missed warnings, inadequate responses, and a lack of urgency in addressing the threats Lauren had reported weeks before the incident. The campus, once a sanctuary of learning and growth, now faced a harsh reckoning for its inability to protect one of its own. Protests erupted on campus as students and faculty demanded answers. Vigils were held in Lauren's honor, her vibrant personality and athletic achievements celebrated amidst the grief. Candles lit the night, their flickering flames a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the collective determination to prevent such a tragedy from recurring. Lauren's parents, devastated by the loss of their daughter, emerged as advocates for change. Speaking with quiet strength, they recounted her story in interviews and public forums, emphasizing the importance of recognizing the warning signs of unhealthy relationships and taking swift action to address them. Their words struck a chord, resonating far beyond the borders of Salt Lake City. As investigations into the university's handling of the case unfolded, new policies began to take shape. Campus police underwent rigorous training, focusing on how to handle reports of stalking and intimate partner violence. A new system for tracking and escalating such reports was implemented, ensuring that no concern would ever again fall through the cracks. But the case's impact extended beyond the University of Utah. National organizations dedicated to campus safety and domestic violence awareness took notice, incorporating Lauren's story into their advocacy efforts. Her name became a rallying cry for change, a reminder of the consequences of inaction and the importance of vigilance in addressing threats. Melvin Roland's actions were dissected in court, his history of manipulation and deceit laid bare. The trial painted a chilling picture of a man who had repeatedly exploited vulnerabilities, using charm and lies to mask his darker impulses. For the jury and the public alike, the evidence left little doubt about the depth of his culpability. As the trial concluded and justice was served, the focus shifted from punishment to prevention. Programs aimed at educating students about recognizing warning signs and setting boundaries became staples on campuses nationwide. Workshops on healthy relationships and bystander intervention empowered students to protect themselves and their peers. Lauren's legacy, forged through unimaginable pain, became a beacon of hope for others. Scholarships were established in her name, supporting students who shared her passion for athletics and academic excellence. Her story, though heartbreaking, inspired countless individuals to stand up against abuse and advocate for those who couldn't. The memory of that October night in 2018 remained vivid for all who had been touched by Lauren's life. Her friends, family, and teammates carried her spirit with them, their grief softened by the knowledge that her story had sparked a movement. Though her life was tragically cut short, Lauren McCluskey's impact would endure, a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of love and justice. The next and final story is called A Fatal Rivalry. On the warm evening of May 27, 2011, Michelle stepped out of her clinical rotation at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward, California. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the hospital parking lot. Dressed in her nursing scrubs, she moved with purpose, her mind likely on the brief break she had planned before returning to finish her shift. Michelle was known for her reliability, A bright, dedicated nursing student, she always showed up for her commitments, a trait that made her sudden absence later that evening all the more perplexing. Surveillance cameras captured her walking confidently to her car, a smile faintly visible on her face as she typed out a text message. It was the last known footage of her. When Michelle didn't return to the hospital, her colleagues initially thought she had simply taken a longer break. But as the minutes turned into hours, concern began to spread. Calls to her cell phone went unanswered. By the end of her shift, Michelle's car was found parked a short distance away, locked and seemingly untouched. Inside the vehicle, her belongings remained undisturbed, including her purse and wallet, items she wouldn't have willingly left behind. The eerie silence surrounding her disappearance sent chills through those who knew her. Michelle's family and friends immediately sprang into action, reaching out to anyone who might have seen or heard from her. The tight-knit Vietnamese-American community in San Diego, where Michelle had grown up, rallied together, their collective worry sharpening into resolve. Posters bearing her photo were distributed, and search parties formed to comb the area. The Hayward Police Department began their investigation, treating the case with the urgency it deserved. As the hours ticked by, a chilling possibility began to take shape. Michelle hadn't simply wandered off. Something, or someone, had intervened. The first breakthrough in the case came when detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the hospital's parking lot. While Michelle's departure seemed ordinary, there was another car spotted circling the area. The vehicle was identified as belonging to Giselle Esteban, a former friend of Michelle's with whom she'd had a falling out months earlier. Giselle had a history of animosity toward Michelle. The tension stemmed from Michelle's friendship with Giselle's ex-boyfriend, whom Giselle was desperate to reconcile with. What had started as subtle hostility had grown into something far darker. Police learned that Giselle had recently been seen near Michelle's workplace, a troubling sign that this wasn't a coincidence. Further digging revealed a pattern of stalking behavior. Phone records showed Giselle had been monitoring Michelle's movements, using GPS tracking software to follow her location. Investigators also uncovered a series of disturbing messages and social media posts where Giselle expressed her growing resentment toward Michelle. Each piece of evidence painted a grim picture of premeditation. By the next morning, the search for Michelle intensified. Volunteers scoured the area around the hospital, while police focused on tracking Giselle's movements. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Giselle's home, hoping to find clues that would lead them to Michelle. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the investigation. Inside Giselle's apartment, investigators found Michelle's bloodstains on a pair of sneakers, along with strands of her hair. Forensic analysis confirmed that these items were directly linked to Michelle, and the timeline of Giselle's activities on the night of the disappearance only deepened their suspicions. Cell phone towers placed Giselle in the same area as Michelle's car during the critical hours when she vanished. Despite the mounting evidence, there was one crucial piece missing: Michelle herself. Without her, the case couldn't be fully closed, and the community's desperation to find her grew with each passing day. Search efforts expanded into the surrounding hills and ravines, volunteers braving heat and rough terrain in the hope of bringing her home. Giselle, meanwhile, maintained a chilling silence. Even as the evidence against her piled up, she refused to cooperate with authorities. Her demeanor remained cold, her lack of remorse unnerving to everyone involved in the case. But investigators weren't deterred. They knew they were closing in on the truth, and they wouldn't stop until they had answers. The stakes rose as law enforcement and volunteers combed through every lead, uncovering a twisted web of jealousy, obsession, and betrayal. And somewhere out there, hidden in the vast landscape of Northern California, was the key to unraveling the full scope of what had happened that fateful May evening. As the days stretched into an agonizing week, the search for Michelle gained momentum. Every avenue was pursued, every lead followed, as her family and the police worked tirelessly to uncover what had happened that fateful evening. The overwhelming support from the community became a lifeline for Michelle's loved ones, but the growing unease was impossible to ignore. Each passing hour without answers deepened the sense of urgency. Detectives focused their investigation on Giselle Esteban, whose connections to Michelle were far too troubling to overlook. Cell phone data painted an undeniable picture. Giselle had been near the hospital the night Michelle disappeared and had followed a route that mirrored Michelle's last known movements. But the most damning discovery came when detectives secured surveillance footage from a gas station. It showed Giselle purchasing bleach, gloves, and other cleaning supplies just hours after Michelle's disappearance. These were items that, in the context of the growing evidence, painted a chilling picture. The tension reached a fever pitch when forensic experts analyzed the bloodstains found on Giselle's sneakers. The results confirmed they were a match to Michelle. While this evidence was significant, it wasn't enough on its own to determine what had happened. Giselle remained uncooperative, refusing to provide any information that might lead investigators to Michelle's location. Giselle's erratic behavior further raised red flags. Friends and acquaintances described her as increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to Michelle's disappearance. She had made alarming comments about her belief that Michelle was trying to ruin her life, repeatedly blaming Michelle for her own troubles. But it wasn't just her words that stood out, it was her actions. Giselle had been seen lurking near Michelle's apartment, her car frequently spotted in areas Michelle was known to frequent. The pattern was undeniable. Giselle had been stalking Michelle for months. Despite the mounting evidence, authorities faced a critical obstacle. Without Michelle's body, they lacked the conclusive proof they needed to bring charges of the highest severity. The search for Michelle intensified, with search and rescue teams scouring remote areas near Hayward. Drones and canine units joined the effort, but the dense terrain posed significant challenges. Each day brought new hope and heartbreak as volunteers and officers combed through ravines, wooded areas, and hiking trails, desperate for any sign of her. Then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A hiker, exploring a remote area near Sunol Regional Wilderness, a rugged expanse of parkland not far from Hayward, came across a shallow grave. The site contained human remains, later identified as belonging to Michelle View. Forensic analysis confirmed what investigators feared. Michelle's life had been taken violently and deliberately. Her discovery marked a turning point in the case, but it also left her family and friends grappling with unimaginable grief. The recovery of Michelle's body provided investigators with the final pieces of the puzzle. A post-mortem examination revealed injuries consistent with a physical struggle, corroborating the theory that Michelle had been lured into a confrontation with Giselle. Combined with the forensic evidence and cell phone data, the picture became clearer. Giselle had meticulously planned her actions, driven by a dangerous combination of jealousy and obsession. With the discovery of Michelle's remains, law enforcement moved quickly to arrest Giselle Esteban. The community that had rallied around Michelle's family now turned its attention to the pursuit of justice. As Giselle was taken into custody, she maintained her silence, showing no remorse. Her expression remained cold and detached, a stark contrast to the pain and anguish she had caused. For Michelle's family, the arrest brought a measure of relief, but no closure. The weight of what had been lost was too heavy, the reality of her absence too profound. Yet, amidst their grief, they remained determined to see the case through to its conclusion. Their focus shifted to ensuring that Michelle's voice would be heard in court, that her story would be told in full, and that her memory would shine brighter than the darkness that had taken her. The courtroom was silent as the trial of Giselle Esteban began. Rows of onlookers, many of them supporters of Michelle's family, sat with solemn faces, their collective gaze fixed on the accused. For those who had followed the case, this was not just a legal proceeding, it was a quest for justice. The stark contrast between the vibrant life Michelle had led and the cold, calculated actions of Giselle filled the air with a heavy tension. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the evidence. They painted a meticulous timeline of events, starting with Giselle's mounting resentment toward Michelle. Witnesses testified to Giselle's erratic behavior in the months leading up to Michelle's disappearance, recounting chilling statements she had made about wanting Michelle out of her life. But it wasn't just words. It was the lengths to which Giselle had gone to monitor Michelle, including the use of tracking apps and her persistent presence near Michelle's workplace. The surveillance footage was played for the jury, a key piece of evidence showing Giselle at the hospital parking lot the night Michelle vanished. The video revealed her pacing, her movements deliberate, as she waited for Michelle to appear. Paired with cell phone data, it became clear that Giselle had followed Michelle's car after she left, setting the stage for what was to come. Forensic experts took the stand to present the physical evidence. Bloodstains found on Giselle's sneakers matched Michelle's DNA. Soil samples from Giselle's car were consistent with the area where Michelle's remains had been discovered, tying Giselle directly to the scene. Each piece of evidence was another blow to the defense, the weight of the truth becoming impossible to ignore. The prosecution's narrative was clear. Giselle's actions were not impulsive but premeditated. Jealousy had consumed her, driving her to meticulously plan every step. Her obsession with regaining control over her ex-boyfriend had spiraled into a fixation on Michelle, whom she irrationally blamed for her perceived failures. The prosecution argued that this toxic combination of emotions culminated in an act of violence meant to eliminate what Giselle saw as an obstacle in her life. Throughout the trial, Giselle sat motionless, her expression unreadable. Occasionally, she whispered to her attorney, but she showed no visible signs of remorse. For Michelle's family, this lack of emotion was almost as painful as the loss itself. They sat together in the front row, holding one another tightly as they listened to the graphic details of Michelle's final moments. The defense, grasping at straws, attempted to argue diminished capacity, citing Giselle's mental health struggles and claiming her actions were not fully within her control. They brought forward character witnesses to attest to her troubled past, but their efforts fell flat against the mountain of evidence presented by the prosecution. Perhaps the most harrowing moment of the trial came when Michelle's family took the stand to deliver impact statements. Her brother, his voice steady despite the tears welling in his eyes, spoke of the void left in their lives. Her father, a man of few words, described the pride he had felt in Michelle's accomplishments and the unrelenting pain of knowing she would never achieve the dream she had worked so hard for. Each word was a dagger, piercing through the courtroom as the jury listened intently. As the trial progressed, the community rallied around Michelle's family. Vigils were held outside the courthouse, candles flickering in the evening breeze as friends and strangers alike gathered to honor her memory. Posters with her smiling face adorned the walls, a poignant reminder of the light that had been stolen. The prosecution rested its case with a powerful closing argument, urging the jury to hold Giselle accountable for her actions. The weight of the evidence, they argued, left no room for doubt. Giselle Esteban had taken Michelle's life in an act of calculated malice, and justice demanded a fitting response. The jury's deliberations stretched into hours, then days. Each moment felt like an eternity for Michelle's family, who anxiously awaited the verdict. When the jury finally returned, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. All eyes turned to the foreperson as the verdict was read aloud. Guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps and tears filled the room, the culmination of months of grief and determination finally reaching its peak. Giselle's sentencing would follow, but for Michelle's family and the community that had fought so hard for her, this moment marked a significant step toward healing. Michelle's voice had been heard, her story told, and the person responsible for her loss held to account. The courtroom had fallen silent once again, but this time it was different. The verdict had been delivered, and Giselle Esteban, found guilty of first-degree murder, now faced the next phase, sentencing. For Michelle's family, the days leading up to this moment were a mix of relief and lingering grief. Justice had been served, but the pain of losing Michelle was a wound that would never fully heal. As the sentencing hearing began, the prosecution and defense presented their final arguments. The prosecution emphasized the premeditated nature of Giselle's actions, reminding the court of her months of stalking and plotting. They painted a picture of a woman consumed by envy and anger, who had made deliberate choices to end Michelle's life. They called for the maximum sentence, arguing that anything less would fail to reflect the gravity of the crime. The defense, in contrast, leaned heavily on mitigating circumstances. Giselle's attorney highlighted her struggles with mental health, claiming that her actions were driven by emotional instability rather than malice. The argument fell flat for many in the courtroom, particularly for Michelle's family, who saw these claims as an attempt to deflect responsibility. As the proceedings continued, the focus shifted to the impact of Giselle's actions on those left behind. Michelle's mother took the stand, her voice trembling as she addressed the court. She spoke not only of the immense loss her family had suffered, but also of Michelle's dreams and ambitions, which had been so tragically cut short. Every word carried the weight of a mother's heartbreak, resonating deeply with everyone present. One by one, Other family members and friends shared their memories of Michelle. They described her as a beacon of kindness and determination, someone who had touched the lives of everyone she met. Each story was a reminder of the light she had brought into the world and the void left in her absence. Giselle remained impassive throughout the hearing, her face betraying no emotion. For many, her lack of remorse was as chilling as the crime itself. The judge, however, listened intently, weighing every word and piece of evidence. When the time came for sentencing, the courtroom once again held its collective breath. The judge's voice was firm and deliberate as the sentence was announced: life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The decision brought a sense of finality to the proceedings, but it was a bittersweet moment for Michelle's family. While justice had been served, it could never bring Michelle back. The aftermath of the trial rippled far beyond the courtroom. Michelle's case became a rallying point for raising awareness about stalking and the dangers it posed. Advocacy groups highlighted the systemic failures that allowed Giselle's behavior to escalate unchecked, calling for reforms in how such cases were handled by law enforcement. Michelle's family channeled their grief into action. They established a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting young women pursuing careers in healthcare, a tribute to Michelle's own aspirations. The foundation also worked to educate the public about the warning signs of unhealthy relationships, ensuring that Michelle's story would serve as a catalyst for change. In the years that followed, Michelle's legacy continued to inspire. Scholarships bearing her name supported countless students, and her story became a symbol of resilience and the enduring fight for justice. While the pain of her loss remained, her family took solace in knowing that her memory lived on, not just in their hearts, but in the lives of those she had touched. Giselle, meanwhile, faded into obscurity, her name remembered only in the context of the crime she committed. For Michelle's loved ones, this was fitting. They chose to focus not on the darkness Giselle had brought into their lives, but on the light that Michelle had shared with the world, a light that would never truly be extinguished. In the years following the trial, the impact of Michelle's story continued to resonate, both within her community and far beyond. For her family and friends, healing was a slow and deliberate process. They carried the weight of their grief every day, but they also carried the determination to honor Michelle's memory in a way that would make a lasting difference. Michelle's mother became a powerful advocate for awareness and prevention of stalking-related violence. Speaking at events and working closely with advocacy groups, she used her voice to highlight the warning signs that had gone unnoticed and the systemic shortcomings that had allowed Giselle's actions to escalate. Her speeches were raw and emotional, often bringing audiences to tears, but they were also a call to action, a reminder that change was possible and necessary. The foundation established in Michelle's name grew rapidly. Through scholarships, mentorship programs, and community outreach, it became a beacon of hope for young women pursuing careers in healthcare. Michelle's passion for nursing, which had been so cruelly cut short, became a source of inspiration for others to follow in her footsteps. Students who received the scholarships often spoke of how Michelle's story motivated them to make a difference in their own lives and communities. But the foundation did more than honor Michelle's professional aspirations. It also became a hub for education and prevention. Workshops and seminars were held to teach people about the dangers of stalking, how to recognize unhealthy relationships, and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. These programs reached thousands, empowering individuals with the knowledge and tools to protect themselves and others. Michelle's friends also played a crucial role in keeping her memory alive. They organized annual events, from candlelight vigils to charity runs, where participants gathered to celebrate Michelle's life and raise funds for the foundation. At each event, photos of Michelle adorned the walls, snapshots of her laughing, studying, and spending time with loved ones. Her vibrant spirit was evident in every image, a stark contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded. Beyond her immediate circle, Michelle's story influenced broader societal conversations. Lawmakers in California cited her case in discussions about strengthening stalking laws and improving protections for victims. Campaigns urging people to take reports of stalking seriously gained traction, leading to better training for law enforcement and more resources for victims. Michelle's case became a turning point, illustrating the devastating consequences of ignoring warning signs and the need for systemic reform. For her family, every small victory in Michelle's name was bittersweet. They took solace in knowing that her legacy was saving lives, but they never stopped missing her. Holidays and birthdays were especially hard. The empty chair at the table a constant reminder of what had been taken from them. Yet, even in their darkest moments, they found strength in the outpouring of support from their community. The city of Hayward eventually installed a memorial bench in Michelle's honor at a local park. The bench, engraved with her name and a message of hope, became a place where people could reflect, remember, and find comfort. It was not uncommon to see flowers left there, often accompanied by handwritten notes from strangers whose lives had been touched by Michelle's story. Giselle Esteban remained in prison, her name fading into obscurity. While her actions would forever be a part of Michelle's story, they no longer defined it. For Michelle's loved ones, focusing on the light she had brought into the world was far more powerful than dwelling on the darkness. As the years went by, Michelle's legacy continued to grow. Her story became a part of college curriculums on criminal justice and psychology, used as a case study to teach students about the complexities of stalking and interpersonal violence. Her name was spoken not in anger or despair, but in admiration for the profound impact she had made, even in death. For those who knew her best, Michelle was more than a symbol of change. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. Her laugh, her kindness, her unwavering determination, they remembered it all. And as they moved forward, they carried her with them, ensuring that the world would never forget the remarkable person Michelle Le had been. If these stories of jealousy, obsession, and betrayal left you reflecting on the complexities of human relationships and the need for awareness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the strange, dark, and mysterious. Turn on notifications so you never miss one of our daily uploads. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons can we learn from these tragic cases, and how can we better protect those in vulnerable situations? Thank you for watching, and remember, recognizing the warning signs in relationships can save lives. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next story. Nah.